Attributes for the element object in JS. We've seen that you can get the tag that you want by their ID, by the class name, or by the name. Then you can then check the different components of the tag given. So you could see if it has an attribute, you can get an attribute, set an attribute, and remove an attribute. Uh, then there's the object styles. Again, you can get it by the class ID or a class name. Then you can look at the style that's being set. You can then see what the color is, see what the font size is, and then even change the color. And again, you could do even more, not just what's provided here, but you can look at whatever style is provided within here, and then access it in the script component down here. So when you're creating the element objects, when you try to create some object, again, you have the script given here, and you can get the element by ID, class name, or name. Once you get the tag you're looking for, you can then start creating a component by create element, what type of tag you want it to be with our element, and then what you want to place inside of the element. And then when you're done setting up the element component, what you can do at the very end is then whatever you set up here, such as content, you would do then content dot append child, and then the child is whatever the new object you just created will be added into the tag given here. Then we looked at the full screen component and how it can adjust. And then we saw how you could build the site. Now we're looking at the JS files. So the package is essentially the simplest form where you can have JavaScript files set up now. Typically, we've been setting up scripts and then writing the JavaScript ourselves. Now we can try seeing how other people's JavaScript files work in an HTML code. So when you're setting up like a filtering system, you can see that you can look at the link here, a filtering system, which can show you and hide elements based on the page and when it's flickered and clicked on. So you can see by clicking on these various things, it's not reloading a new page, rather it's just manipulating what components you're allowed to see when you click on a certain link. And again, it's different ways of presenting your information. You could do by changing the link every time by clicking on something new, but it would be somewhat redundant when it's not necessary. So in this case, when you're looking at languages, you rather have it be able to like toggle which content you want to see. And so in order to do that, you use the JavaScript script component by looking at the ID that you want, setting its value, attributes such as hidden. That's how you can manipulate it and see how it changes. Animations and whatnot can be added in a bit after, but the general logic of how you can apply it is shown there. So when you're importing, what you can do is script source and then whatever your JS file is, and then close script. If you remember when you were setting up your Bootstrap for CSS, and when you created the general skeleton of the code, at the very bottom there should have been a script component, two type of scripts component that were essentially just calling these JS files, which allowed the different like uh animations and whatnot that you kind of see when looking at the web pages. But again, when you want to import your own, this is how you can do it. So the way it works is that you can see there's some documentation already set up to see how you can present this, and you can find it on the link given over here. When you're using other people's projects, you should always pick projects with documentation, and you have to make sure you can read it. That way, you'll at least understand how a certain component was implemented on their page, and then how you could try implementing a similar type of solution onto your own. And then try picking one task at a time, implement that task with the package, and then again, look at as many examples as possible, as that always helps. So looking at this exercise, you can find the exercise given on on the GitHub, and try setting it up so that when you click between the various buttons, different types of content are going to be shown here. You'll have about 10 minutes for this exercise. Looking at the package managers, they exist for many languages such as Pip in Python, Cargo in Rust, Mav in Gradle and Java, and etc. They are there to help simplify the use of using other people's code. So far, you probably have seen pip for Python, but in JavaScript, there's one called npm, Node Package Modules, or Package Manager, my mistake. So the Node Package Manager, essentially is a system that allows you to run Node.js packages. Since we won't have enough time to cover the Node.js in this course, it's going to be worth learning, especially when you're looking at future development, because Node.js helps us with writing JavaScript projects easier, and typically a lot of people use it. So it not only allows you to write normal JavaScript, but it can actually be extended to JavaScript by running its own Node.js server, which gives you the extra functionality that JavaScript doesn't always typically provide. If you want more resources on about Node.js and the NPM, there's some resources provided here on the slides. This all sounds great. However, the thing is that with the NPM package, it's often kind of gross and it is overkill to use in every project that you use. However, if we want to use some packages don't require a Node.js server running and they'll actually compile to the plain JavaScript that you provide. And for those, we can use the CDNs. So the CDNs, which stand for Content Delivery Networks, are systems that allow you to bring your code and resources from the internet. So JavaScript, CSS, images, videos, and whatnot. And in general development, we'll talk about the CDNs that deliver code specifically, as well as the context of the slides that we're talking about. And keep in mind that there are also systems that distribute it in your HTML. The reason why we use them for code is that it's not only because it's easy to use, but they're often faster than whatever's running on your server code. Likewise, it's compatible for packages with npm, and you don't have to build them all on your own, which will save you time with the setup. And there are dangers of CDNs, and again, you can click on the link here to see how you can avoid those problems. Uh, can we code more, please? And absolutely, you can. You can always check out the various libraries that are provided with JavaScript and npm, and then again, you can see from the doc, YouTube videos, blog posts, and etc. All the packages that we picked, you can use any of these options to figure out, and all of these options will, if you check through these, you'll figure out how to cover them. But from here on, we'll be covering like the basics of these components. So the general highlight of JS is that the library for doing the syntax highlighting, you'll see in many editors. It helps you when you try to make a site that talks about the code and post code snippets. For example, as shown over here, we have this particular snippet of code, which just is code, not text or anything as such. You've probably seen a similar presentation of this earlier on in regular HTML and CSS. However, the JavaScript component just makes this a lot more cleaner. And then again, you can see here, why not just use the CSS? You might be thinking it makes more sense to use the CSS that we already saw it earlier. But if we look into the example we saw earlier, and if we need to dynamically change the color of the text based on if it's a variable or whatnot, and add inline numbers, as this isn't possible with just plain CSS. It will cause a lot more detailing, and you would have to be a lot more specific with how you kind of set up that information. Whereas with JavaScript, they'll just allow you to do it properly, and this implementation would be better. Getting the code, when you're looking through the highlight.js doc, you can see that there are many options to configure the highlight.js. But ultimately, we're going to want to use a simple configuration called common, which can be used with the basic CSS theme to get started. And again, you can look at all the files for this on the link provided here on the slide. So when you're installing on the page, to install highlight.js on a page, the first thing you need to do is the CSS for the theme we want to use. We need to consider that. We also need to consider the JavaScript for the syntax highlighting, which is shown after the body, and then running the JavaScript function to tell the highlight.js to start with. So we can see here we have highlight.js CSS, then we have the highlight.js, and then now here we're saying tell highlight JS to start over here. So the way we can add a code is once we've installed it, you can then add it into your HTML that tells the highlight.js we want to use it for a section. And to do this, we use two elements and a class. So what we've shown here is pre, which is an element that maintains the formatting. So like languages for Python, but we need the exact formatting, tabs and spaces, or else the code is invalid. The code is an element that tells the highlights JS this code, and then the class language name, is to tell the highlight JS which language syntax rules to obey. So looking at this case right here, uh, what we have here is pre as the element, and then within this pre we have the code element, which is the highlight of the highlight JS component. And what we did is that we set class equals to language Python, meaning the type of logic and the code implementation we're using is based on Python. So as you can see here, for element in shopping list, you print element. This type of for loop you've seen in Python. And with the highlight.js, we've now been able to incorporate the Python syntax into the highlight.js, uh, essentially. In order to activate the highlights, you're given this script right here where you do a highlight.js highlight all script, which essentially just activates the highlighting. And so without this, none of the code would actually be highlighted. So again, you have age 23, you have your if statements, your else statements. With the escaping, there's probably one problem with the displaying code is that what are we trying is where we're displaying it by writing the code, and how's the browser supposed to know what is the code and what is just a representation of the code. So as escaping is where you can essentially provide the breaks for characters in the code, which essentially display the content that you want properly. And in our case provided here, if we want to replace the greater than less than signs, since we put them up in the HTML to represent the HTML, the browser will just think it's more HTML code. And so you have certain conditions like and less than and greater and, which will allow for it to actually be visible on the browser and not just consider itself as like code to be placed on the browser. So in this exercise, we want to make a page that shows off some code from the first session. So we have the div component h1 tag and then the Google link provided here. And what we want to do is have basically finish it so making sure it has the same formatting as above. So essentially we want this type of content to show. You'll have about 10 minutes for this. Actually, no. I think we'll skip this because I think we're running out of time. Uh, Again, it's not too complicated for this. You'll just have to follow the components shown here, like such as the and less than and greater than. Changing the theme is nice as there's a lot of themes and languages in highlight.js for the highlight.js supports. And to implement them, you can click on the find the file link here and then change your code to implement that theme instead of the default one provided. Adding language support. So adding the language support, it's in the same place as listed as all the additional languages. And again, you can just click on the link and see what type of JS file you want and what type of language you want to use. Taking in user input. So we've seen like some standard uh manipulation of websites. So it's really purely based on like clicking, maybe moving the cursor around, those kind of aspects. But now we got to see how can we incorporate input fields and whatnot on a website, which can take in user input and then provide a result out of it. As we have implemented like the forms and such, but those are only just like the layout. They haven't had any actual practical use yet. And so the JS is going to be able to incorporate that actual practical use. So again, it's sometimes used for comments for a blog or contact form a company. Any average contact us page that you sometimes see where you enter your email information, what you want to say, all that kind of stuff. That's usually the whole point of user input and then the JS component to dealing with the other aspect of it. And again, you can see here the quick and like simple way of doing it is like your name, your email, and the message that you want to do. These are the HTML forms that you have. And then some other examples that you have is down here where you have it slightly differently adjusted. Instead of just a basic implementation, there's sometimes custom implementation of what type of content you want for the user to see. And that's how you can add it here. The only downsides from this is that it's all plain text and the forms can become a bit strange, quirky with how they process data. And they're definitely not effective for long content or content that needs formatting. So like essays, blog posts, and etc. It really helps with like generic type of content where it isn't too complicated, but once you delve into a bit more complicated components, then you're gonna have to start adding in a bit more customized aspects to it. So what you see is what you get. Editors are a very common functionality needed for websites and apps. There's a ton of different versions, but ultimately what they help you do is make it a simple way for users to enter and format content like a comment section or a social media post, as shown over here in this example given down here. So there are various editor types as well. There's your single plane, which uses Quill Tiny MCE. Again, you can click on these links to see further more information about them. They're helpful. The small single plane is useful for small bursts of content. Block base is good for long type of content. Articles are like general discussion posts that you might also find on D12, such as those. Form based is good for highly structured content. So you have your contact forms, sign in, check-in forms, and profile pages. And then document based is good for just documents in general, where you have a lot of content with specific formatting and details that you may not have an easy time using with these other components. So you can see here, single plain classic is just a simple text provided here and then results printout right here. Everything typed in one box with controls either is on top or inline. So then again, you can see where there's Reddit, Slack, Medium. All of those use this type of uh, user input method. And then with forms, we can see here we have actual components provided here where you have to provide name, email, what type of request we're making, and then some comment about it. Again, this is not necessarily what you see is what you get, but the forms will often be used for content that has rules or multiple inputs. And again, there could be more subcategories as well for this. Document based will often have the often what you see is what you get. And again, they can also contain form or forms to configure settings about the document, as shown just in that part of the GIF right there, where you have the general layout, such as Google Docs, and when you want to see some more components or specify some, you set up a form to see how what stuff you want to see. Block based, each piece of content is its own block, and then lots of modern website editors use this, as and you can see this at the editor JS, where you can add in your own type of content that you want per section. So we're going to be using Medium Editor, which is a toolbar style editor, which means all of our controls and formatting will live in that toolbar as shown up here, and then how you want to design it as such. The basic way of doing it by the installation is making sure you click on the link here. And what you can do is either download it locally or use the CDN. Again, uh, Personally, I think having it downloaded is better without having to always continuously reapply a CDN. If you have it downloaded locally, you can always have it implemented into your future projects a bit more easily. Again, it's up to you. The choice is yours. So in order to set up the code, you can first do the setup by adding a div somewhere in an editable class. So again, you're going to be calling this class editable with div, and then you can initialize the editor so that you can access it later in JavaScript. So in your script component, you can call it edit equals the new medium editor, editable, which is going to allow you to manipulate the contents inside of this div. Uh, uh, don't worry about this exercise again. You can check on the GitHub to see the exercise and try implementing it yourself. Um, Customization again, there's in our editor, there's three main ways. There's modifying our toolbar, setting up a theme, and adding and plugging in extensions. To modify the toolbar, you can look at the JSON object, which is provided right here. Essentially, it is a JSON as we saw earlier with like the content that we want to see. And within inside of it, we can see what type of configurations we want within it. If you're setting up a theme, the themes can be found on their GitHub with plenty of options to pick from. You can download the CSS file if you want, or you could import it after the editor CSS. So here they have three different links provided here with three different hrefs provided, all with a specific type of CSS component they want to implement. And for the plugin and extensions, what you can do is for any plugin extension, you can import the necessary CSS and JS files. So again, what they did here is for the Medium editor JS, they just did the script over here, provided the uh, link for it, and then closing script tag, and then similar again down here for plugin JS, they did the same thing here. So again, in this image, you can see there's the CSS, which is provided within the head component of HTML, and then you can have the script component on the outside again for that. For this to be continued, again, we can see some more data types presented here. You can then register them in the same config object we use to modify our toolbar. So now we've got just beyond this table equals to new media editor table. We also have it within this config portion, these additional components added in. And then with the editor still remaining as new medium editor. And then we have editable and now config, which is now part of editor. The reason why relying on third-party code sucks is because other people's code not might necessarily work exactly in the way you want. Like some plugins might be broken, and the example provided does work, but however, because there's a bug in the plugin, it'll break currently. And the issue is that if the plugins don't work, then your general implementation of code won't work. So that is one downside of trying to use another person's code. However, sometimes it is easier to use their other code if the general usage of it is simple and standard and not like a bit changing or a bit more complicated. And those conditions you sometimes need to find your own way of implementation. But again, uh it's really finding a good balance between which type of code you should be using and what type of code you should try maybe making on your own. So getting the data, we can see here we have the editor and then editor dot get content. And so the get content will essentially get the data out of the medium editor. And so you will just need to run that for the instance. On button presses, so what we see here is a button on click, and then we have a condition of save content, save button. And within the script, we have the editor equals to new medium editor, editable, and then we have a function called save content. And this is where you would save instead of logging. So here we have console.log editor.get content. This is just what's set up right here for now, but in this area is where you would want to try to save the content to somewhere. And so this button here is essentially accessing this function in the script. Looking more about saving files, the file saver JS, there's three ways you could do this. Or three steps, I mean. You got to import the file saver. Ideally, it's from the CDN. create a string with your content, and then create a blob. So that's like a file-like object, and then you can export the blob to a file with the file saver. And hence why you have the save as condition here, blob, and then hello world.html. So that would create the file name hello world.html. And then they have the required like type of content you want to save. So again, this relates back to the previous slide we were just looking at with saving content. It's really up to you on how you do the implementation of this and how you would want to use this specifically with like the type of logic. Don't worry about the exercise. We can make this nicer. And again, what we have here when have a final HTML such as this, what we can do is set up the general content of the HTML file and then have this saved to some other file. And then this would be considered like the skeleton code that can be generally used over and over. Well, and again, this is like a pre-design of a Bootstrap page. The problems with HTML generation is that you're gonna always be uh, I guess sanitizing it at any input you're getting, and you would want to make sure you want to avoid some common security mistakes, since if there's any errors that occur, it can occur on the file itself, and it might not even function properly. So with the generation, there's some more links you can click on here to see. And again, there's more complicated versions, some simple versions to avoid these problems. In general, overall, you can check these links and see how they've implemented these security measures to ensure that these bugs don't oftenly happen. The problems with HTML generation example here. So in this example, we're trying to do a single line pop-up, and now imagine someone uses this to send a password to their server. This would cause a lot of issues, especially because of the security component not being established. And again, you want to make sure that the general security of the function that you do is set properly and is robust. There are other packages that you can use out there in JavaScript. There's an endless amount. Again, you can look at other projects and then see how you can implement them into your own. Visualization is another part you can look at. Sometimes you just want to make sure something looks cool. So there's different JS components and libraries that you can implement, and then they can all help with the aspect of your page. There's the games and whatnot. Unity is one. 3JS is another one. WebGL, Babylon is one. All of these can help with developing these uh, games, and they all use these JS libraries. There are different parts of the site. There's the front end. We'll quickly go through this. Front end, HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript that you see. All of that stuff is useful. Again, helps you make your page look interesting and unique. Backend is with the server side of content. So front end is client side stuff you'll see. Backend is the stuff happening behind the scenes. So you won't be seeing all of this stuff. Again, it's all server side. So data, information, all that kind of components that you store, data that you want to save to, data that you want to read from, write to, all that kind of stuff. That deals with the backend section of the web page. And then there's the comparison between the two, backend and front end. So back-end interaction is really useful because it helps with the interaction of making a proper full stack website. And so essentially, front end is what we've been talking about. Back end is more what we'll see in the future, where we're trying to store files, manipulate files, deal with and open write files, all that kind of stuff. And again, those kind of contents are going to be really useful if you're trying to produce a website that serves more than just like a simple web page that has information on it, and rather is much more interactive and like can you update information on it. And then there's multiple ways of developing a website. You can break it down into different types and see what type of content is added. So far, the sites we've needed or made don't require a database or anything super fancy. Right now, we're just trying to see a website that we can show to people and make it look nice. That's it. But for like on a online company or a login and we want to create content and we want to show up, that's where the backend components show up. So there's static sites. Static sites are where the backend is just the bare minimum. It's primarily the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's doing the heavy component or the heavy lifting of the website. Backend is just to send the files to the client, and this would work for sites that we built so far. These tend to be cheapest and often free and easiest to set up since really it's just only the front end components that you're dealing with, nothing too major in the back end. The next thing that we're going to be looking at is seeing how we can make reusable code that can be quickly swapped. And so we've looked at the front end and static sites. Now we're going to be looking at the static site generators and templating them. There's an optional exercise that you can look in. Again, these exercises are going to be helpful for yourself to understand how they've implemented these web pages and designs. And for the end of session exercise, we'll be looking at how to make things interactive. There's three levels again. So first level is to change the blog page layout to 12 columns with more info and add Mermaid.js support to the blog post. Again, you can click on the link and see how to implement this. Level two is create a personal site that uses at least one new JS library. And this demo has two. You only have to do one component or one of these. This is level two. And level three is trying to create a site that displays animals and uses a form to submit new animals, so new HTML files onto the page. Uh, I don't
Skip
believe
this one.
this.
Skip this
Okay.
one. No worries about this.
All right, and yeah, that would be all for this session. Again, I would like to apologize for taking a bit of your time, additional time. There ha is quite a lot of content for JavaScript to cover, and even then, if you don't fully understand it, it's all right. It is a complex component of the web design to consider about, and it does require a lot of practice to see how you can improve upon it. Uh, Without any other questions, you are feel free to leave.